Why should you probably not buy a property in Kenya or Uganda as a foreigner? I've been to both countries numerous times. I'm involved in an entity in that part of the world. I'm very optimistic about the long term future of both countries. However, I've lived in developing countries before, and I've noticed that expats who live in those developing countries make one key mistake. They assume the higher GDP growth will result in better returns in local assets, whether that's local property, local stocks, and so on and so forth. But that doesn't always happen. So, for example, China, apparently, according to the official statistics, has grown very well in the last 17 years or so, but it's been one of the worst performing stock markets in the world. Likewise, you can see that when it comes to other parts of the world, that higher GDP growth doesn't always result in better stock market and property performance. And I saw that when I lived in Southeast Asia before, that many people thought the higher GDP growth would result in higher prices for property, and it didn't always happen. But then linked to that, there's the assumption that property is the same in an emerging market as in a developed market. But in reality, developing countries usually have much less liquid property markets. What that means is it's not as easy to sell your property. So I'll give you an example. Back in the day when I was in Cambodia for a year, I met a British gentleman who sold his property in the UK, and he went over to Cambodia, and he boasted to me that his property and land there was worth 300% more than it was, and it was so much better than the UK. However, he then tried to sell it and he couldn't sell it. So it was pretty much worth zero unless he then did something with that land and property and so on. So ultimately, in addition to the risk being higher in emerging markets, the liquidity is worse often, and you shouldn't assume, as mentioned, the higher growth is going to lead to better asset prices. I mean, look at the last 10 years. What's been actually the best performing investment adjusted for risk? Arguably, the US stock market, right? You're not taking an absolutely massive risk like with crypto or something like that, where 10 years ago is very much a niche thing. The US stock market has done incredibly well and has been one of the main benefactors of emerging market growth, because Starbucks are selling more coffee in China and India than they were before. Apple are selling more Apple computers. So the ironic thing is, if Kenya and Uganda and other places in Africa end up doing as well as I think they might do, the biggest benefactors of that could be the big multinational companies.